Now, first of all, ladies and gentlemen, the motion we see as it is quite problematic in the status quo because FTAs, by definition, do not include free labor movements, ladies and gentlemen. In the international economics arena of the status quo, there exist multiple trade pacts that are termed free trade agreements, or common customs unions, or common markets, Mr. Speaker. And free trade agreement refers to trade pacts between countries that gradually reduce tariffs, Mr. Speaker, whereas customs unions are not that provide same tariffs to non-pact countries, as in the case of Mercosur, South America. And we have common markets like the one in the European Union, in which we have free labor movement, Mr. Speaker. So essentially, we think it's some oxymoron and self-contradictory to claim that FTAs should include free labor movements. So in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to first contextualize this debate to actually force the motion that the CAP made to become more appropriate, ladies and gentlemen. So with this in mind, one, on the issue of contextualization. First, I'm going to contextualize FTAs in the status quo. Now, Mr. Speaker, well, actually, I've kind of done that. So I'm going to contextualize free labor movement, ladies and gentlemen. Now, we're going to follow the UN Pact on Labor Movement on most of the terms and most of the issues that's going to arise with the issue of labor movements. There's going to be freedom of movement, abolition of discriminations based on race or nationality in terms of employment, and also we're going to make sure that laws and regulations are followed according to the state in which employment is being practiced, Mr. Speaker. Now, with this cleared up, we want to also emphasize that this issue about free labor movement is not about experts, nor is it about professionals, Mr. Speaker. We're talking about laborers, skilled and unskilled industrial workers, Mr. Speaker. Why? Because in cases when multinational corporations scout experts and professionals to work at their companies, what happens is that their employment is fixed before they receive their visas, Mr. Speaker. So in this case, we're going to make sure that these people can move freely between countries with this pact and look for employment once they move. So we're going to guarantee free movement without or with or without the secured employment being in place or not, Mr. Speaker. And furthermore, I'm going to talk about the diversity of situations because diverse solutions are needed for diverse problems, Mr. Speaker. It's quite ridiculous for anyone to claim that a single policy is appropriate for everything in all countries and all pacts that exist in the international community right now, ladies and gentlemen. Which is why the opening government today would like to talk about a very current situation and recent situations that affect most of us right now, Mr. Speaker. So essentially, the opening government would like to talk about Chorus FTA, the FTA between the United States and South Korea, which is in negotiation at the status quo. And what the opening government essentially is proposing that this FTA include the issue of free labor movement in order in its process of ratification, Mr. Speaker. Now, with this cleared up, I want to know if there's any questions coming from the opposite bench regarding contextualization of today's motion. So, none. So, ladies and gentlemen, once that we've agreed that this debate should be in the sphere of the issues of Korean-US FTA and the issue of free labor movement between these two countries, what I'm going to do in my speech is tell you about the benefits that this policy, including the issue of free labor movement within the FTA of the United States and Korea, will bring to our society, both the United States and Korea. And secondly, I'm also going to talk about how including this article would in fact reduce a lot of the concerns and the problems that FTA might or will cause with its ratification. And finally, I'm also going to mention briefly about the long-term benefits that it's going to bring about in Korea and the United States, which my second speaker is also going to elaborate because there's a lot of long-term benefits to be discussed in today's debate. Now, with this cleared up, let me move on directly into the issues of how it strengthens the benefits and effects of FTA once we include the article of free labor movement into the clauses of the FTA between the United States and South Korea. Now, first of all, ladies and gentlemen, what we have is we have a strengthened effect of specialization of industries, Mr. Speaker. The essentially important factor that contributes to countries' economic flourishment or economic statuses with FTAs is the fact that specialization occurs with the reduction of tariff barriers and trade barriers, Mr. Speaker. Countries can specialize and countries can focus more heavily on the industries that they have advantages, comparative advantages in, which is why trade agreements and trade pacts in all forms are beneficial to most countries related within the trade pact, Mr. Speaker. But with this free labor movement, what happens is we have a strengthened specialization of industries, Mr. Speaker, because when countries specialize their industries, what they have is they have additional resources that they can utilize, Mr. Speaker, because they have a bigger pool of labor resources they can utilize and they can use to strengthen their industries, Mr. Speaker. No, thank you, sir. So we don't get demand. Which is why, including this article, would strengthen countries' capabilities to reap the benefits of FTAs and forms of free trade agreements. And secondly, on the issue of creation of a more competent labor force, Mr. Speaker, what we have with the free labor movement is that countries, workers, skilled and unskilled, can move to industries and move to countries where there are industries that require more employment, Mr. Speaker. And with this, they oftentimes move to countries where there's an advanced or relatively advanced and higher level of industries in that country, Mr. Speaker, which is why this free labor movement guarantees an improvement in the general competence of the labor force of both countries. Because why? They can go learn through employment in industries that are advanced, in industries that have more relative comparative advantage within the international arena. No, thank you, ma'am. And finally, I'm going to talk about how it lessens and weakens the harms of the FTA, Korean-United States FTA, that a lot of Koreans and both Americans are very concerned about, Mr. Speaker. Now, one issue that most Koreans are extremely worried about the status quo with the FTA is the issue of rice and agriculture and whatnot, Mr. Speaker. Because, ladies and gentlemen, they fear that Korean farmers are going to lose their jobs. Korean farmers and American industrial workers are going to lose their jobs with the ratification of the free trade agreement, Mr. Speaker. But what happens is that we opens up an opportunity for these people to seek employment in the industries that that is domestically incompetent compared to those of other countries. We provide them with a lifeline for them to continue their jobs, continue their livelihoods, Mr. Speaker, without being forced to switch or forced to change to other industries or into other occupations that have no familiarity or expertise in. Which is why it significantly lessens the amount of harms that FTAs are going to also have. And also what happens is that it decreases the discrepancy of payment and welfare of multinational corporations that act both in the United States and Korea, Mr. Speaker, including, for instance, Hyundai, for example. Because, ladies and gentlemen, for instance, in the Hyundai factories that create cars in the United States and Korea, Korean workers work much longer labor hours compared to those counterparts in the United States, whereas Korean laborers also receive better payment than those compared in the United States, Mr. Speaker. And this has led to a lot of conflicts on both sides and discontentment on both sides of the American and the Korean workforce of Hyundai and whatnot, ladies and gentlemen, which is why it's a benefit to the multinational corporations for their governments to endorse this policy of free labor movement, because it makes it more equal, okay? So all in all, Mr. Speaker, including this path in the pro-free labor movement strengthens the benefits, lessens the harms, which is why we want to include this in the FTA of South Korea and United States. Thank you.
All the arguments from the government is really fine under the condition that South Korea and the United States is in an equal position and they have equal circumstances. While the opposition believes that this is a lopsided treatment, this is not going to be a fair. This is not going to be a fair treaty in the first place. And that is in the case where they talked about Hyundai. They told you they're going to have competent labor forces and all that. But what I believe and what the opposition believes is that if you actually start to move these people who are actually hardworking, if you start to move these people out of the country and actually to America, what's going to happen is that America's car industries are actually going to be strengthened, while Korea's car industries are going to be less strengthened. And that's the point that the opposition is trying to make today. So before I move on to my two major substantives, I firstly want to rebut some of their arguments first of all. Now, first of all, they said it's going to lead to specialization of industries. First of all, I didn't really hear a clear analysis of how especially labor trade actually leads to these kinds of specialization of industries. We believe that even without the free labor trade, these kinds of specialization of industries could be realized in the first place. And the second most important argument was about the competent labor force and rice and agriculture and this thing of rice and agriculture, right? But what we fear in the opposition side is this movement out of the country, right? When actually competent workers in South Korea actually move out to America, no, thank you, sir. What happens is that South Korea actually gets less social capital. It doesn't have social capital, especially in the Asian society where you need actually competent workers in South Korea. What happens is that when you actually allow these kinds of free labor movements, which Korean laborers could actually freely move to America for better conditions, for better working conditions, as he told you in the Hyundai case, what happens is that America is strengthened, their industry is strengthened because of competent Korean workers. But what happens to Korea is that it doesn't have really competent workers in the status quo, right? Because other movements. Okay, come on. Let me hear. Yes, sir.
Okay, point, sir. We believe that with the FTA, it's better to have Korean citizens employed elsewhere than to have them unemployed here at home.
Of course, sir. That's an assumption also, I think, that Korean workers are actually unemployed in the status quo. There are different conditions for different countries, so I think that I'm going to be dealing with that in my second argument. So, available. Yeah, but to continue on to the point that South Korean workers are going to be more incentivized to actually move out to America, where it has better health care, it has better working conditions, 8-hour working conditions, it has better kind of social institutions. So what's fundamentally going to happen under the government's case is that South Korea's South Korea's social capital is going to be completed under this kind of lopsided treaty we have in the status quo. So now, moving on to my two arguments. My first argument is going to be about the difference between trading things and the difference between trading people. My second argument is going to be about the domestic implications that this policy could have. Now, first of all, about the difference between trading things and trading people, right? Okay, Mr. and Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, first of all, we say, that for things, for products, if there are leftovers, we can just dispose them, throw them out of the ground, maybe burn them, right? Well, in the case of people, we can't do that. If we actually have influx of people, we have to actually take care of them. We have to actually provide healthcare policies. We have to actually provide transportation, those kind of welfare policies, and this is going to be a huge cost for the government itself. So trading things and trading these kinds of people are going to be completely different, and trading people is going to be more costly for the government itself. But the second most important thing in this point is that this point about the social capital, right? These people are social capitals that I mentioned to you, right? These kind of skilled laborers who needs to be working in South Korean agriculture society, who needs to be employed in South Korean industries, are going to be actually moving out, incentivized to actually move out to America and pursue better profits, pursue those kinds of things in a free society, right? That's why we actually regulate these kinds of things, right? We regulate these kinds of flows in the first place, because we don't want South Korean workers to suddenly go out to America and actually leave Korea in a desolate state. And that leads to my second argument about the domestic implications. What we believe, Mr. Speaker, is that the reason we have visa, the reason we actually regulate people going in and out of the country, especially labor, is because it affects employment in that country. What's going to happen in America, what's going to happen in Korea, is that if we actually have free labor, the cheap labor are going to come into the country, and what's going to happen is it's going to actually push out the domestic workers out of jobs. The exact point of unemployment is going to be more realized under their case, because cheap labor and competitive labor are going to come into the country and push out these domestic people.
Okay,
and we believe for the no, thank you, Sai. Sorry, took one. Sit down. For the responsible government today, Mr. Speaker, it needs to take care of its people. It needs to provide welfare policies. It needs to provide employment for its people. But in a free labor market state, what happens is cheap labor comes in, and these kinds of people who are fairly uncompetitive and are going to be pushed out of their jobs, right? But the most important thing, the second point I'm going to be telling you today, is that there's not going to be a stable job environment. What I'm saying is that what happens if there's not going to be a stable working environment. What happens is that if there's a free trade of labor happening in the status quo, what's going to happen is that these kind of jobs are easily interchangeable. What I mean is that if these industries need jobs, then they're going to hire workers from outside the country, and if economy fluctuates, and if these workers are not needed, they're going to simply just push out of these workers. Similar to the 비정규직 and 정규직 problem that's happening in the Korean society today, that it's going to lead to more labor flexibility, but we believe that labor flexibility is not always advantageous to the society, because it doesn't really provide a stable working environment. In a competitive employment market, what's going to happen is that people are going to be easily pushed out of companies, easily pushed out of pushed out of these places because companies are gonna be hiring these kinds of people who are coming from these kinds of outside countries. So ultimately, what's gonna happen, Mr. Speaker, is that people who are living in the country are not gonna get really stable job environments because they have to compete with all these kinds of people who are actually in the country. And because these people can actually easily move out to another countries and so, it's not going to create a stable working environment in the Korean society today. So what did I tell you? First of all, I told you that treating people and treating things is radically different because people are social capital, people are important in the society. But second of all, I told you about the domestic implication about how if there's a free exchange of labor, it's going to be a lopsided exchange of labor, and cheap labor is going to actually push out these kinds of it's going to take away domestic jobs, which the government should actually provide for the citizens. So for all of these reasons, we beg to oppose.
Speaker for his speech, and now we welcome Deputy Prime Minister.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, as the second speaker coming from the opening government, I'm going to provide three things in my speech. First of all, I'll deal with the rebuttals to the speeches of the LO. Second, I'll deal with the arguments coming from LO. And now I'll move on to my third argument coming from the opening government, which will be about long-term benefits. Not only about the economic benefits we already have provided, but we will talk about another dimension when it comes to the interaction of humans and interaction of and the benefits coming out from it, and benefits that both sides can enjoy. So first of all, the rebuttals to rebuttals. They say that if you're forced to move, it's unfair. However, we're not telling you to force to move some of the personnel, or else we are opening chances for them who are unemployed in domestic area, who have been disadvantaged because of the comparative advantage, better comparative advantage to U.S. We're opening a chance for them to actually sustain their lives. Second rebuttals. When it comes to specialization, we do not talk about specialization. We talked about strengthening of the competency of each sector on the both sides of U.S. and South Korea in their domestic areas, which they have better comparative advantage on. So when this labor market, the trade of labor market happens, Korea can invest and focus more on their sectors, their powerful sectors, and for U.S. vice versa. And moving on to my third rebuttal. So you talk about people will go out suddenly and will suffer from shortage of workers. However, as our POI successfully defended, we say that instead of you just starving in subway station in Korea, it's better for you to go to U.S. and get some job there if the trade happens. And fourth argument, they talk about working conditions and whatnot. However, as I'll be provided in my rebuttals to their argument, each country has laws and provision. U.S. has its own, Korea has its own. And because we set the guidelines to that, and as our Prime Minister clarified, we're going to abide by that law of U.S. and Korea, which working condition will be preserved and sustained and maintained and protected. The rights of the workers will be protected under the government of U.S. and also the government of South Korea. Moving on to their argument. Their first argument was about this. We're trading products and human resources are different. Yes, there are some parts of difference, but that does not mean that there are only harmful things in it. They first did not clarify which government will be harmed. Second, they provide no analysis on why trading human resources is more costly than trading products. And when they say that people in South Korea will now be incentivized to go out and all work in U.S. Two contradiction and over-assumption coming from the LO is that first, their assumption is that all people would go out, which will not happen because the minimum wage of Korea factually is higher than the United States. Second, they are self-contradictory is that they say that, okay, people in South Korea will all go to the United States. And 3 minutes later, they say that because all of these human resources from U.S. will eventually go into Korea, which can actually decrease the chances of domestic workers to actually work in the domestic field. So they're making self-contradictory case, even in their first argument. Second argument, they talk about stable working environment. We say that both in U.S., United States, and both in Korea, we have laws and provisions when it comes to providing environment, working environment, and the laws of hiring and firing. And there is no such rule that if you are a foreigner, you're more prone to be fired by the company. Because of this, because of very fundamental basis of all the working conditions, rules of laws when it comes to protecting the workers, we say that because we're abiding by the law of each government, this will not happen. So their argument is out. So moving on to my argument. My third argument coming from the opening government will be the long-term benefits. We believe that when it comes to trade, it's not only mainly it's about economic benefits, but there are a lot of spillover effects that is actually helpful to strengthen or even improve the relationship between, in this case, United States and Korea. So not only the products, but when the human resources are being traded, there will be more room for those within those resources, within those labor workers. There are more room for discourse when it comes to controversial issues, from the petty issues rising in their lives, but to the extent where they have more open discussion when it comes to controversial issues between the two nations. So because of this, it provides more opportunity for both of the countries, the citizens or the workers of the both countries, to be more open to each other, more open to diverse opinions, and it minimizes the harm such as the closure of the ideas coming from nationalism or whatnot. So we believe that because it's about human, because it's different from the products, we say more communication, healthy discourse will happen under this. So when you look at the trade happening within the products, you see that the products imported in our country actually represents the domestic image or brand image of the country, of the other country who actually exported to frame it differently. If you see the countries imported to our country, we see that they represent the other countries' brand images or domestic images, right? So if the quality is better, it better represents other countries. And this would happen better when it comes to human resources, because there are a lot of capabilities for humans to actually have healthy discourse and have healthy discussions. Not only we provide these long-term benefits, we also say that by the trade of labor workforce, we minimize the harms that is existing in the current status quo when it comes to FTA between United States and South Korea, especially when we provided an example of agriculture. That's why we're very proud to propose.
Welcome, Deputy Director.
I realize the elephant in the room today is that I am the only non-Korean debater in this debate, which is why I claim opening government is extremely Korean when they only see the benefits of Korea when it comes to this FTA. What we have told you very clearly from my first speaker is that, first of all, the impact on Korea will be the fact that people that are qualified to work here are now inclined to go to the US. There's perhaps more employment opportunities, there's better living conditions. They just told you, people will move because there will be better conditions for them. We think that's not beneficial for Korea. Secondly, they completely fail to actually engage with the idea that there will be a displacement of domestic employees, of domestic labor. They told you from the very PM speech that, we want to, abolish all, discrimination, but they forget the fact that when you have these FTAs, like we told you, it's going to be a lopsided situation, probably no matter what. What will happen is that you will have cheaper labor coming in, impacting the domestic labor. Now it's the Americans that won't have a job. Where will they go? They probably won't come to Korea for the fact that they are accustomed to their own lifestyle. They are accustomed to the fact that they have a better living conditions just because why these Koreans went there too. This is something that they have completely failed to engage with. No, thank you, sir. They simply need to engage with the idea that there are two countries that are in this situation. We told you, it's not the same as products because frankly, you can dispose of a surplus product. You cannot dispose a surplus human being. What are you going to do with all these people that now will move and don't have the capability, no thank you, don't have the capability of actually then having that workplace that you have to then take responsibility for under this FTA. So in my speech, let's do a couple more rebuttals and then go to talk about how this will discourage domestic development of industries and employment and education. And finally, take a case study of where this actually happens, and that is the Europe, Mr. Speaker, under the Schengen, where we have free movement of labor. So, no, thank you, sir. So basically they told you in the second speech that, oh, we're not gonna, we're not forcing them, but we already told you this is a coercive situation where you are providing in one country more opportunities. You are providing more the capability of, having a lower wage, or, you will be able to have a better life. What will happen is that not only will I say, oh, it's nice to go there, I'm going to go there, but also they're going to come, and they're going to come, and then we'll all be there, and who's going to be here? We think that at the end of the day, there will be a coercive situation where you are offering the capability of a better life. That also means that the domestic government will now be hindered not only by the chance of you'll have less people, but you won't have an incentive to make the situation better for the fact that you don't have people to do so. Then finally they told, no thank you sir, they told you that long-term benefits, or we'll have discussed, or we'll have exchange. We think that this exchange happens in the first place because frankly this is the 21st century. We have all these mechanisms. When we need discourse, when we need exchange of, for example, technology, we do that. But frankly this is a two-way street. In their model, when we have when we have free movement of labor, we generally have one-way direction. We need to have, just like in FTA, it's a two-way street where one country is selling you a product and then takes the benefit of it. But we don't see this happening. No, thank you, sir. We don't actually see this happening under when we talk of free movement of labor. We see that we'll have simply a drain of not only brain power, but also tax money. No, thank you. We'll have all these drains, and we don't see them providing resolutions to those issues. Yes, sir.
Okay, first of all, South Korea and the United States is not so asymmetric as you portray, because Korea provides massively better welfare programs to the United States in the status quo. And furthermore, people incentivized to move to unfamiliar environments are people whose industries are harmed by FTAs, which harms that still exist under your model of free trade agreements.
Not unequal. Really, Mr. Speaker, let's talk about the size of economy, the capabilities, what U.S. living standards are, what U.S. living costs are. I know they're Korean, and I know that if you're in Seoul, your living standards are high. If you're in, the countryside, your living standards aren't equally high. There is a difference between these two countries. There is a difference between every single two countries. There are no such thing as two same countries. That's also the issue in here. So let's move on to why is this unnecessary and simply will create a lesser incentive for a country for domestic industries and education. They told you, okay, what we are going to then have is that not only will we have comparative advantage and the creation of industry that will have then, or products that will have comparative industry advantage in, but also will have, specialized workforces. We think that this is extremely unbeneficial for us as a nation. What we'll then have is that we will have the state focusing only on certain industries of education. We will simply have people wanting to specialize in certain things. If you want to go to the US from Korea, you'll be, majoring in business or law or whatever. And these will be the ones that will always be having no thank you, so you have your chance. We will simply have these systems then develop. What about everything else? What about the things that we want domestically? When we have this situation where people think, going to US, you had your chance. When we have this situation where people are saying that, oh, I want to go to the States, and if I do major in business, I'll get there. Everybody will be going that way, and thus the funds will be also going to that major. We don't see other social development or educational development. We don't see people going into architecture. We don't see people going into agricultural systems. We need those people for the sake of our domestic development. Now, finally, let's close up with a very quick case study of what is going on in Europe, where we do have a system of free movement of labor. So first of all, two situations. We have the so-called, east to west movement, where we have, for example, Romanians going to UK. Why do they do that? For significantly higher level of living standard, but a lot higher prices. They go there and now displace the domestic employment. Now the UK people, the British people that don't have that much of education are displaced from the workforce, from the labor force, because of the fact that there will be somebody willing to do that job for a lower price. At the same time, we have people moving from the Western countries within the Western countries. Also, we have the people moving from the Western countries to the Eastern countries to take the high-level jobs, to take the high-level jobs that need a high level of education. We don't want that to happen either, because once again, that country will be now disfavored in the sense of their own education. We don't want that to see happen. So when the closing government comes up to the podium, I want them to take a look at the whole picture and not simply how do the few Koreans benefit from this. We don't see that point. We oppose this motion.
Today we've seen a very interesting debate, apparently not based on the understanding of how economy functions. As a person who's been taking so many economic subjects, I'd like to integrate more of the economic concepts and more of what reality is reflecting. And first of all, I'd like to start with clarifying the purpose and the definition of what FTA is, moving on to my rebuttals in 3 stances, and specify what sort of mechanisms would seem to be kind of less supported by the opening government. And fourthly, I'd like to provide to you with a 5-level analysis, and 6th, I'd like to explain to you how it's going to strengthen the values that we pursue in our society. So first of all, the definition of an FTA. So the reason why countries engage in FTA is because by decreasing barriers and restrictions, not ridding it as it seems how the opposition understood it, by decreasing barriers and at the same time having some countermeasures such as laws or restrictions that can value your country's interests and your country's values, we believe that with this, countries make a cost-benefit analysis. They decide to engage in FTA if that's truly going to benefit themselves, and if they see that something's not enough, they simply don't engage in the FTA, or at least they make countermeasures such as laws and restrictions if that's of their interest. And we believe that FTA is not a straitjacket. Countries engage in months of agreements and months of meetings and whatnot just simply to come to agreement. This really shows that you can alter FTAs depending on case by case, and we believe that this is a true value of FTA, and this is why countries are engaging in FTA. That is why so many countries want to sign FTAs at the current status. But at the same time, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to give you 3 rebuttals before I move on to my substantive case. First of all, the opposition has constantly been telling you about the drain-out effect. Now that, we believe, is a short term. In the short term, yes, there will be so much labor influx of talented intellectuals into developed countries. And yes, because of this drain out, the supply will increase in developed countries and such corporates. Now what will happen? Because of increased supply and constant and stable demand, this means that the price of labor or the benefits the laborers will get will decrease. Now accordingly, this will mean that this is a short-term process. Maybe there will be a boom in the first time, but at the end, or in the long term, we believe that the boom will be lessened, and at the same time, we believe that there can be countermeasures to lessen this effect if that's so severe for developing countries. Second of all, displacement of labor. Now first of all, the opposition team has been telling us that there's not enough people running out of their countries and moving to developed countries, corporations and whatnot is wrong. Well, first of all, why not self-actualization? If I want something, if I think this is important, if this will help me, why can't I go to another country? I have the free will and I live in a democratic society. We believe that this is perfectly okay. At the same time, we believe that this is not that ridding FTA and just simply limiting FTA, which can be so competitive, is not the right solution. If people moving to a different country and lacking your country's resources is a problem, then strengthen your industry, strengthen your economy. That will be a better solution. Because we believe that even if you tie down people for the temporary stance, it'll do no better for your country. You're going to stay there forever. There's going to be no advancement. So we believe that strengthening your
your own economy or your industry will be a better solution if they think that's the problem. Third of all, they told us how people will choose only competent majors such as economics, management, whatnot, and unpopular majors such as humanities will be neglected. However, we think this is a totally different issue. This is a problem with Korean society where such competent majors are emphasized because there's a limited number of jobs. Limited number of jobs, ladies and gentlemen. Because of this, we believe that if people want self-actualization, if they want more opportunities, they have the right to move to different countries and pursue them. And we think that the FTA with better stances such as flexible labor movement will increase this chance. Third of all, we believe that they have a very big assumption that countries are incapable of making decisions of their own interest. We believe that this is truly not true because countries can make their cost-benefit analysis, and now I'd like to move on to my substantive arguments. First of all, the current status quo. The reason why this motion is here is because there is a movement from manufacturing to IT industry. Now this is the true, genuine value that we should understand. The reason is because manufacturing, it's all done by machines and mechanism and automation, that's all taking place. Now IT is what able says, and this is why IT is increasing more in value. And at the same time, IT is unique, and this is the true value that will be more integrated in FTA's increased value because IT is based on people's creativity and ideas, and we believe that based on this, there will be a more emphasis on human values and more human creativity, and this will lead to a better society for our future. Now I'd like to move on to my 5 levels of analysis. First of all, please wait, please. Okay, so first of all, we believe that countries with companies and developed countries can have more benefit. And it's because why? Companies can have more suitable talent to their necessities, and this will lead to a higher quality of labor being exploited, and better services and goods will be produced and informed to the customers. And at the same time, this will strengthen the company's stance and exploit the competitive advantage, which is perfectly okay in the capitalist system we live in. And at the same time, we believe that diversity, the value that we pursue so much, will be strengthened. Why so? Because more diverse labor will be influxed, and that means that companies will be able to integrate more diverse values into their system. At the same time, second of all, we believe that long-term effects will long-term benefits will outweigh the losses of drain-outs. We believe that in the short term, maybe, there will be so much drain-out of the intellectuals or the talents of the developing countries. However, we believe that this will be solved in the long term because they will go there at first, but when there's increased supply and limited demand or stable demand, we believe that this is only going to be a short term. And if that's such a big problem, we believe that other solutions should be made rather than just simply penalizing such an effective system that can lead to people's and countries' benefits. Yes, please.
If your workforce selfishly chooses to self-actualize and move out of the country, how do you really suggest you can actually then improve your national economy and your national industry?
That will be in my next argument. Thank you. So third of all, we believe that it will be beneficial because the opposition seems to be putting so much emphasis on GDP, which is gross domestic product. However, there's also a value called GNP, gross national product. Gross national product is the income of your nationalities, your citizens. That means if your citizens increase more income, and if they have more money, they will be more likely to spend it in their own countries. They can invest things, they can send money to their family members, why not? This can also help developing countries, which seems to be neglected in their case, and it's R&D contribution as well. At the same time, fourth of all, we believe that self-actualization of individuals can take place. Why so? Because people can pursue their own benefits, their own values, and at the same time, being in an environment where you can develop your skills and exploit your skills seems perfectly fine. And we believe that if, fifth of all, FTA with labor movements guaranteed can improve this, and we believe it's the government's right to enable people's rights to be ensured, people's rights to be self-actualized and be more promoted, because that is the value why governments exist, for the people and by the people and of the people, right? So, based on this, what am I to imitate? First of all, I provide you a background of how the change from manufacturing to IT is leading to the spirit of this motion. Second of all, what specific mechanisms we can use, such as minimizing visa issues or like lowering citizenship requirement. At the same time, we've also provided you with reruns. Fourth of all, I provided you with 5 levels of analysis. So we believe that truly our contribution is big. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, the deadlock coming from the opening half of the debate, which made you somewhat bored, was that opening government talked about that there would be a labor force, a lot of people, Korean people, will move to the United States, and unemployment and underdevelopment of agriculture or the problems of the industry will be dramatically solved. And opening opposition came out and saying, no, that is not true. Like that is not true. No, that will aggravate the situation in Korea. And then like closing government so far came out and gave like 5 level of analysis, which actually within the government bench. Meaning, they say, like in a long-term perspective, not actually a huge influx of Korean people will suddenly move to the United States, but actually there could be a kind of like balance. Therefore, like both parties will smile, so FTA is good or whatnot. So I, as a member of the opposition, will bring up the core issue of today's debate. The reason why the FTA and like including the labor market within the FTA is problematic because it actually gives a legal excuse for the Korean government and also the United States government to actually escape from the responsibility that the state should have. We think that this kind of moment, when the FTA includes the labor market, suddenly the Korean government have a legitimacy to say, if the agriculture fails, then move to the United States and become a like farmer in California and like pick out like oranges or whatnot. I think that this kind of irresponsibility is the problem that we need to fix. But before going on to any extensions that I was going to provide you, I would first like to rebut to the points made by the opposing government bench. Firstly, they said like it is individual rights to move to their other countries. We are not talking about whether individuals have the right to self-actualize themselves by studying abroad or working abroad. But the point is that the problem takes place when FTA and the systematic force of the government takes in. We think that the FTA will actually make the individual to forcefully move to another country, bearing all the costs on individuals to find a job to sustain their life. We think that this kind of portion of the choice is a problematic and is a responsibility of the government. Because if the government really wants to fulfill the role, we think the government should actually focus to develop their domestic market or focus to provide other alternative market rather than simply say because we now have a free trade agreement between the labor market, why not moving to another country that might exploit you, that might not hire you in the first place, Mr. Speaker. So we think that their self-actualization issue fails. But furthermore, so having fully rebutted to their arguments, now let's move on to the extension. Firstly, my first extension coming from the closing opposition is that the government's role to preserve the comparative advantage, especially when it comes to the human resources. We think that the government's role is to provide a sustainable workplace for the environment so that each individual can actually safely live under the guideline of the states or the nation. We think that in this case, if this motion passes, if my job bankrupt or if the industry that I'm working in goes wrong, we think that individuals actually lose the claim towards the accountability that Korean government used to have. Because in terms of agriculture, Mr. Speaker, when the agriculture is suffering in current status quo, still the farmers have a say to the government because the government is the one who should provide some solution reasonable solution for those farmers to revive and to work again. We think that if this motion passes, since the easier way for the government to solve these agriculture problem or the lacking industry problem is to simply say there is a new market that you can stay in, so why not move? We think that this option is very wrong in the first place because of the 3 level of analysis. Firstly, if this motion passes, then it is only individuals who need to bear the cost. Because simply opening up the labor market, doesn't necessarily mean that government will provide every kind of cost that individuals should bear when they forcefully need to move. Why is that? For example, let's imagine that I'm a farmer and I need to move because I have no other place to work on. Then I need to learn English in order to accommodate the needs and accommodate the culture of the American market. And secondly, I also bear the uncertainty considering the fact that actually even the United States market, domestic market, is overflowing with the workers from Mexico, from other countries or whatnot. And bearing this uncertainty, we actually think that the huge cost coming from the individual is that they are forced to leave the community that they belong to. We think that these kinds of displacement that government actually promote is very wrong in the first place and very irresponsible for this place. So,
Madam Speaker, you keep on talking about people are forced to move due to economic implications of FTAs. But first of all, the problem of economic implications is not mutually exclusive with your model with having FTAs and no solutions, Madam Speaker. And what we're doing is providing with a solution to make livelihoods continue.
We think that the reasons of the clear difference between government's model and opposition model is that now government holds the only require accountability to solve the problem and to revive the economy that they are failing. We are not trying to give another solution which will not solve anything. Having said that, actually furthermore, we think that this will actually make individuals suffer more because of the very legal difference that Korea and the United States of America face. For example, since the social welfare system or the law regarding the labor market is so much different, although government simply overgeneralized that these employees will be followed by the laws of United States market, we think that when there is a collision of the law takes place, we think that it is the individual who need to ask for the court, who need to find the lawyer to empower to express their rights or whatnot. We think that these are very irresponsible from the government bench. But furthermore, the second extension coming from is that actually the FTA, when we put the labor market into the FTA clause, we actually given the excuse for the very conservative United States congressmen to even reject the FTA to go on. We think that it actually delays and further burdens the economy who are waiting for the FTA in car markets or whatnot. Why is that? Because even in the status quo, the United Congress from very conservative politicians often use the rhetoric that we need to preserve our domestic market, we need not to open the border from Mexicans, and we need to protect our own market. We think that these kinds of rhetorics will be even more emphasized and even more empowered if we put labor market clause into the FTA. And why is that problematic? We clearly showed you, and because FTA is done conditionally, and there is already a car industry and many other industries who are waiting for post-FTA economy. And if this FTA is even delayed due to the strengthened rhetorics by these conservative congressmen, we think it will not benefit not only Korea but also the United States, because the more the delay takes place, the more the social cost and unnecessary cost we should bear. So because of all these reasons, I think that closing opposition contributed the most, thus we win. Thank you.
Speaker for her speech. Now welcome government speakers.
Mr. Speaker, I'm probably sure that everyone in this room is or will be a valuable labor resource who is going to jump into the labor market some 2-3 years from now. When that happens, Mr. Speaker, I want to tell you my story. My dream is to become an entrepreneur, but because the Korean entrepreneurship, the Korean startup setup is quite messed up, Mr. Speaker, I want to go to a place where I can realize my potential, where I can use my comparative advantage to benefit myself, to make myself happy, and to benefit the whole industry as a whole. And Mr. Speaker, I'm pretty sure that foreign person named Andy would probably want to come to our country too, because he thinks that he can fit in with this economy, because he wants to be here because it makes him happy to be with Koreans' best brilliance of minds. And we think this is a good trade-off, isn't it, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, what I'm going to do in today's debate is to prove to you why Hyun and Andy can be so happy with this capacity. What I'm also going to do, Mr. Speaker, is going to prove to you how that makes the whole economy, worldwide, nationwide, industry-wide, so beneficial. But before that, a rebuttal that doesn't fit into my substantive analyzation of clashes. And it was this argument that FTA is suddenly going to be destabilized, is going to be delayed, coming from the protected time from the member of government. The problem is this. They say America won't want this deal, where their whole case was based upon the fact that America would want this deal. It's very contradictory to begin with. But secondly, Mr. Speaker, we think a trade is a trade. You know how FTA goes on. If labor market clauses are fixed, then it gets issued that time. If clementine markets, car markets are fixed, it gets issued stage by stage. There's no problem with this. Third point, because if we can wait, Mr. Speaker, even if that weren't the case, if we can wait to make the best deal, we think a responsible government should wait, Mr. Speaker. Now let me move on to my substantive. We're going to analyze the benefits and harms that this motion is going to bring to the table. But before that, one clear thing to establish in today's debate. A good policy debate should be a debate about weighing the benefits and harms. If you listen very carefully to whatever the opposition is saying, they never attacked our benefits. All they relied on was harm. We think a responsible government should be able to weigh those two and to see how we can mitigate the harms that may come and how we can make the benefits bigger. That's what we are going to do. Now let's look at benefits. And obviously this debate will trade off between efficiency and stability. So let's look at how efficiency is going to be maximized and how stability Whatever harms may be posed to stability is going to be mitigated by already existing orders of economy. Now let's talk about benefits first. We have told you on our side of the house that comparative advantage is going to take place. Our opening did a pretty good job of telling you the theories of how comparative advantage takes place. We think our real contribution in this debate was to talk about how in labor markets, comparative advantage is an important thing. We provided you very important backgrounds that are very relevant in today's debate. What were those? Perhaps one, the fact that the age is changing from a manufacturing industry to an IT industry. Therefore, what labor can do, what it can create as a synergy is getting bigger and bigger. And it's important for industries, it's important for everyone in every sector of the world to be able to utilize this comparative advantage. Second, perhaps that even because there's a limit to what money, capital, or machines can achieve. Maybe they can get a 5-6% benefit. But the fact of the matter is, if you get a diversity of opinions, what you have is perhaps this boom, ladies and gentlemen, creativity, self-power, and we've pointed to you that as an exclusive contribution coming from our side of the house. The problem with their side of the house, the problem that they seem to have is that this logic that labor isn't something that should be considered a commodity. If that's the case, they shouldn't enter into the work market. If that's the case, they should probably say that corporations shouldn't fire people because it's disposing labor. Mr. Speaker, it's about responsibility of a utilitarian government that benefits, if not everyone, then at least the majority of society. And we think this is a great deal. Let's also talk about how it's going to and we've also talked about it's going to incentivize the environment to get more competitive, and that was also our unique contribution. We've told you how corporations are going to work to make the welfare environment okay. We've told you also how the society as a whole is going to be more human-centered, how it's going to want to allocate more resources to their own country. Therefore, the society will work to make their country worth living for. And that was something that the opposing never tackled. But also, plus all of these benefits, what we have is this case of self-actualization and rights. The opposing government seem to say that rights are not important because it's the government's responsibility to make the right choice. Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, that was a tautological logic. Government should protect its people, therefore it's government responsibility. But second of all, we think a responsible government should make a choice. And lastly, Mr. Speaker, it's a FTA agreement. It's a shame to all those politicians and representatives who have shouted out at American representatives to make the best deal for Korea, Mr. Speaker. Trade is something that every side agrees upon, and it has been that way. There was no lopsidedness. Let's also talk about the harms that they presented to stability. What we've told you on our side of the house is firstly proven to you why that lopsided agreement won't occur in the first place. But second of all, how the shortage of workers that they provided is going to be mitigated by a number of factors. What were these? First, we've told you that that's going to be mitigated by the fact that there is already economical logic working there. Therefore, if something gets crowded, it's not going to be. It's going to have an incentive for the price to go up. Therefore, other places is going to be. Sorry, yes, Laura.
A responsible government, first and foremost, takes care of its own citizens. How are you going to guarantee, as I told you in my speech, that these domestic workers do not get disposed? That is the difference between firing under the status quo.
Mr. Speaker, if they want to say that they won't want to let go of one single worker, if this policy can benefit everyone, we're happy, Mr. Speaker, to provide safety nets for that worker. This is a trade-off, Mr. Speaker. We're not admitting to the fact that our policy is going to make everyone happy, but at least it's going to make the most of the society happy. Also, let's talk about how the shortage of workers is going to be mitigated by the fact that the trade is going to have compensations on the developing countries' behalf. And we told you GMP, which I think this is a very important contribution of our side of the house, that money gets influenced, ladies and gentlemen, to the developing countries, which they can use as capital to build their economy. Something never refuted by the closing. Also, Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, the only argument that stands against a high or policy is this argument that displacement of workers will take place and that they might have to move. But the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, it's the government responsibility to make safety nets for them, and we will. It's the government responsibility to make restrictions on activity. This debate, Mr. Speaker, isn't about a blanket ban, a blanket allowance of this policy. This debate is about whether we're going to include free labor in consideration of FTA. We think, Mr. Speaker, it's a really, really good deal. We're very proud of this. Thank you.
So
work for jobs they want. But secondly, it's like, why not? It's a convenient excuse because FTAs inevitably hurt certain markets with less competitive advantage. Let's let people have that like option of going somewhere else in case people are pissed. And then like both sides fervently argued how more competition is really good. The stance coming from closing opposition is very clear. We tell you, Mr. Speaker, open market is not an absolute good like closing government blindly argues. That's why when we like have FTAs, countries sit down and discuss for a very long time which market they're willing to open, opening which market actually benefits themselves. So in that case, especially when we talk about South Korea and USA, we don't think labor market is a smart and wise option for both countries to open up. We furthermore think that like convenient excuse is the exact reason why we should not allow this, because government has certain obligations to provide alternatives for people who want to stay in the community that they live. And we think that where there is an open rhetoric about how foreigners are coming to invade our country and take our jobs within USA, this is a really dumb idea to like promote to Koreans. Yeah, so like two issues.
Okay,
Number one, no. Number one, is it going to lead to the like solutions that opening government analyzed? And secondly, is this policy actually something that the government should responsibly do or not? Let's firstly talk about problem-solution mismatch. Because any government, you guys, if you analyze a problem, you need to solve it, right? So firstly, when they talked about like anti-discrimination laws, like fine, have anti-discrimination laws. We're not here to completely deny the idea of influx of labor force, Mr. Speaker. We think simply what we promote is, number one, it shouldn't be attached to FTAs, so it's like a convenient excuse to soothe people who are going to be pissed off for the markets that's going to be damaged through FTAs. But furthermore, we think that limited influx, limited exchange of labor force could be good, right? But what we oppose is this blind opening of these markets where people are inevitably going to be devastated. Korean farmers are going to be devastated because we can't compete against like American rice, and that's why you putting this option in front of people is a poorest choice, right? So we're happy to promote anti-discrimination laws. We think that's an idea for a different debate. But furthermore, that's precisely why this more competition and therefore more competency doesn't necessarily work. The idea here is countries sit down and decide which market they want to specialize in. Therefore, for us to expect Korean farmers to somehow increase competency and like provide better quality of farming in both markets is not possible because Korean farmers cannot compete against American farmers, where the size of these farming industry within America is so largely big, and that is why that like open competition is going to be lopsided in a certain industry that Korea like decides to forego.
Okay, so clarification.
We think in that case, using labor as a bargaining chip is especially bad idea. Why do we say so? My member clearly told you, Mr. Speaker, that look, these kind of skills, these kind of technology and infrastructure is something that the government has to provide, has to minimally be able to maintain in a society. We think it's a completely different idea than like GNP and money, because these kind of infrastructure, these kind of skills, the countries autonomously should have, and therefore should not necessarily entirely depend upon another market, especially when it comes to labor force, is a very, very pernicious and dangerous option for countries, especially South Korea, to forego, right? But furthermore, we think that, look, therefore that's why your increased competency, how we're going to have better competition, is not going to work, because there's no competition to begin with, right? So we think that that's why people who built their lives, people who built their lives in, like, about farming within Korea, people who built their lives regarding IT within the United States should have an option or should be able to call for government help in terms of providing different types of market choices, or like should be able to call for government in terms of helping. Look, you've opened the market, therefore provide us with government support that we need right now, because I want to live in America working as an IT worker, therefore you have to provide me with certain choices. It's something that's not going to happen, something that's going to be completely weakened when the government actually says, look, we open the market, therefore go work there. That's a legitimate choice for you. So let's secondly look at then, like, under this idea of like problem solution like mismatch, let's also look at the idea of how then FTAs are, like how these political discourse regarding FTA is going to be damaged. Because my member clearly told you, Mr. Speaker, that look, right now with like what largely happens between USA and Korea is that a lot of these cabinet members sit down and discuss what kinds of trade items that we want to like choose, what kind of trade markets that we want to choose. But what actually actually happens after these kind of discussions is that we continuously see U.S. Congress shutting down or vetoing certain clauses that we've decided. We think that that's because there are large rhetoric coming from conservative politicians that look like we have to prioritize domestic markets, and therefore we shouldn't actually engage in FTAs with foreign nations, i.e. Korea, right? We think that when you actually open labor force, which a society as a whole within America finds it very sensitive regarding foreigners taking jobs, finding it very sensitive regarding other competitions with foreign workers. We think that it strengthens rhetoric for conservative politicians to use and sway the discourse regarding FTA as something more hostile, something for us for American community to be more careful about, to be more cautious about, to be more hostile about. We think this is ultimately bad because all of these benefits that you've discussed regarding open trade cannot necessarily happen as well, or societies cannot necessarily approach it with more open mind as well when that kind of discourse is allowed because we open labor markets, right? So we think that's bad. Lastly, let's look at those small benefits that both sides discussed, because there was this idea regarding how society will be more human-centric, right? Bosun talked about how we will discourse about it, how people can be more human-centric. Number one, Mr. Speaker, what do you mean by human-centric? How does that actually happen with FTAs and labor treaties? We think that largely regarding, as we explained, the situation that's going to happen is that these people who run out of options for work are inevitably going to be forced to actually move on to different communities where they don't necessarily voluntarily choose or want to actually live, but are forced in that sense. They may or may not have any jobs. They may or may not actually benefit from this, but actually, what actually happens is these people are inevitably going to view it as a last resort that they're going to be forced to move. We don't necessarily think that's human-centric, especially when we see a large discrepancy regarding technologies of markets that these countries differently specialize upon. So all in all, Mr. Speaker, we think that, well, open market could be a good thing, but at this point regarding US and Korea trade, we don't necessarily think opening labor is a good thing, especially if it's to soothe farmers or soothe people who lost out from FTA, and that's why we're supremely proud of